Okay, what is our agenda for today? We are going to have our goals. We're going to talk about the goals of this meeting. We're going to set some expectations, what this meeting will cover and what it will not cover. And then we'll talk about something very important, probably the most important thing for CCIE is the mindset, how you should be thinking as you're going through your studies. Okay. We have the phases of studies. We'll talk about, resource preparation, when you should schedule your written, all the different phases that a typical CCIE candidate goes through. We'll go over the resources that RouterGods provides, such as the GNS3 topologies, the Slack room, and our nightly labbing sessions. Almost nightly. There's some nights where we are lazy, but pretty much 90% of the time we have a nightly labbing session. Very important topic. How much is all of this going to cost? The money. So I'm just going to tell you right up front, it's probably going to cost somewhere between $10,000 to $15,000 if you total it up. Okay, so I've given you a link to a worksheet that you can calculate stuff depending on how many attempts and the boot camps and stuff like that. But ballpark figure is around 10 to 15K. Then we'll get into the books and other resources. We'll talk about the written exam. We'll talk about the workbooks and the boot camps. We'll compare different vendors like INE, IP Expert, Micronics in a as non-biased approach as we can. And also, by the way, in the room right now, there are several CCIEs who have passed. So I'll be periodically stopping at each topic to get their opinions and their thoughts on things because everyone does stuff differently. In addition to the CCIEs in the room right now, I've talked to a bunch of CCIEs and I've pasted their stuff. So if they're not here live, at the end of this hackpad, I don't know why I'm scrolling down there, but at the very end of the hackpad, you will see that we have links and text from other CCIEs. John Chin, Mike Marvell. We'll talk about Mike. He's a crazy guy. Luke also pasted a whole bunch of stuff here. Right, so we'll talk about all that. Fabian, I don't know how to say that last name. It's French. Dujo, something like that. He's going to kill me, I know. He is an SE, Cisco SE, based out of Mexico City. He's a 7-time CCIE, and he likes helping people get their CCIE. So he was my proctor in Miami City for the remote lab. But we'll get to that later. Okay. After workbooks and boot camps, how do I lab? How much should I lab? We'll talk about virtualization, the whole GNS3 versus viral versus, CML versus all the other stuff. A little bit about rack rentals, study groups, lab scheduling, and then we get to the end where we have the advice from the CCIEs, and we'll end up, if we have time, with Q&A from the CCIEs that are in the room. Okay? So questions about the agenda before we dive right into it. Okay, here we go. So the goal of this meeting is to answer all the common questions that people have for CCIE because we've been getting hit a lot in the CCIE and general channels about very, very common CCIE questions. How do I start? What workbook do I buy? Is INE better than Micronics? Which boot camp do I take? When should I take the written? And it just goes on and on and on. GNS3 versus viral. What kind of server should I get? All these questions that keep coming up every other day. And you've probably seen it as well. It's like, man, another GNS3 versus viral question, another NARBIC question. So we'll answer all that. This will be recorded, and then this will be in the welcome email sent out to all new members. So hopefully we cut down on that. And another thing is to give you the information to decide whether CCIE is for you. It's not for everyone. And I would rather have you have all the information and then decide, you know what, sounds kind of too crazy. I'm kind of happy with the CCNP. I don't want to go for it. Because I don't want you to spend a lot of time and money going down the route if halfway through you kind of go, well, it's a nice try, but I think I'll try something else, right? And also lastly, maybe the most important is to show you that getting CCIE is possible. You can do it. And the way I look at it is one of the benefits, we'll talk later about boot camps, is the reason I like going to a boot camp is you're seeing normal people for the most part. They breathe the same air you do. They eat the same food you do. They have two eyes. If you poke them with a stick, they bleed. All this stuff. They get CCIE. They're a normal dude. So that should prove to you that you can also get CCIE. It is very possible tens of thousands of people have done it. So it's not impossible. You could definitely do it. It's up to you to decide whether you want to do it. Okay? So those are our main goals for today. But let's set some expectations, right? Because some people may be expecting something different. The main thing we see is, I call it the magic bullet syndrome. People who ask, what's the best workbook? What's the best book to buy? If I can only buy one book, what do I buy? If I can only do one vendor, what do I do? What's the best thing to do? And the problem with this magic bullet syndrome is you think that you can get the optimal plan. You can plan all of this out perfectly, and you'll basically beat all the tens of thousands of other CCIEs who have done it before you, and let's say do it with only 500 hours of labbing, or the minimal amount of effort. So there is no magic bullet. People pass with every workbook. People pass with no workbooks. People pass with going to both boot camps or 3 boot camps. And then there are people who pass with no boot camps, right? So this brings me up to our second thing, is the black and white viewpoint. So people say, okay, GNS3 versus viral. Which one should I pick? Well, it's not, if you pick GNS3, it doesn't mean you're not going to use viral. And opposite is true. If you're using viral, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not using GNS3. You can use both. So don't get into this black and white thinking. Another thing is INE versus micronics. Which one do I go with? I can tell you right now, in the room right now with the people who have passed CCIE, a lot of people, actually most people, used both. They started with INE. They worked through the INE workbooks and all the fun that it entailed. And then they went to Micronics bootcamp, and then they did the Micronics workbooks. So there are people that do both, right? So don't think that if you go to INE that you can't do Micronics. That's not true. Everyone's journey is different. My journey is completely different than your journey, completely different than Matt's journey, different than Catherine's journey, and Matt's journey is just fucked up and weird, but it's very strange, right? So everyone has their own story. And related to that, speaking about Matt, for every example I give, there's going to be someone out there who has passed that did something completely opposite, a counter example, right? So I'll give you an example. Common recommendation is the night before the lab, you try to relax, get as much sleep as possible, and then go into the lab rested, right? That's a very common recommendation. Lots of people give it. Then there are people who basically did not sleep the night before, or maybe 2 nights before, still go in, still pass the damn thing, right? So every recommendation that's out there, you can find an example that's opposite of that. Doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. It's just say, on average, you should do this, or we recommend this, right? So same thing, like boot camps. I recommend that people go to a boot camp for many reasons, but you can always find a counter example of someone who got their CCIE just no boot camp at all, right? So it's, don't get too hung up by that. And finally, this session is mainly about strategic objectives. So what do I mean by that? It's more talking about the who, the what, the how, the high level overview. Should you be doing CCIE? We're not going to get into topics like OSPF and BGP and stuff like that. That's for like much later stuff. And we're not going to cover the lab itself. If you want the lab itself, there's another YouTube video that we did 2 years ago about the lab experience, and you can watch that. right? So it doesn't cover the lab itself, like the diagnostic and the troubleshooting and all that stuff. So this is more high level, everything leading up to the lab, right? The phases leading up to the lab, okay? So that's our setting the expectations. Any questions about that?
Well, personally, I think one of the important things is simply don't be a slave to options. It's often a breeding ground for inaction. Use what you can. And I see some candidates suffer from a kind of paralysis in the face of options. So I think the worst thing is your magic bullet thing, the false dichotomy. Say you choose INE versus Micronics as if that's a false choice. But the worst thing that can happen is you're still going to learn something and improve. So I think you just need to make a decision, do your research, and just do it. That's how it's done, I think.
You can choose between vendors. You can talk about what's better or not. However you study, I mean, there's people who have been passing without it. Focus on mastering the fundamentals, and go from there.
Yeah, I was going to say that as long as you're learning something from the content or the options that you have, they're useful. And
Yep.
that way you should use all your available options as long as you're learning something from it and you're getting something out of it.
Yep, that's all good stuff. Actually, I think I need to add to this mindset stuff. Hold on for a second. Sourcefulness. We'll talk about that. Okay, the most important part of all of this is the mindset, how you should look at CCIE, right? So at a very basic level, if we break down everything, here's kind of how it goes. You're gonna study by reading books or doing some labs in the workbook. You're gonna pass your written. You're gonna lab like hell. You're gonna pass the lab exam and then get CCIE. If we had to break it down into the basic stuff, that's what it is. That's everything simplified, right? But people have the mindset going in. A lot of people, they're coming from CCNA and CCNP, right? And I know most of you in the room have passed CCNA and CCNP. CCNP is fairly difficult. I mean, it's gotten up there in terms of difficulty, but there's a reason why they call it cut, copy, and paste. Right? It's very straightforward configuration. There's not too many gotchas, and it's basically 3 books, 1 book for each section, 1 book for each test, and it's not too bad, right? So things are completely 180 when you start looking at CCIE. I tell people, and a lot of people say, CCIE is not a technology exam. It's not only a technology exam. Now there is technology in it. There's a lot of technology in it, but that's not knowing the technology is not really why people don't make it all the way to the end, right? It's because if it was just a technology exam, a lot of people would have CCIE. You know, when you go into the lab exam, and I think the other people who've gone to the lab can probably back me up on this, most of the people in that room, if it's about eight people, depending on which office you go to or which lab station you go to, right? So let's say 8 people, right? Those 8 people, if you were to ask them, or if you were to ask their coworkers, is this person the best network guy on your team, or one of the best, right? The answer would most likely be yes, he is the best out of our group, right? So in their minds, this guy should kill the lab exam. But what happens? Most people don't pass the lab exam because Cisco knows that everyone who steps into that room is pretty decent at their job. So they have to find some way of failing people, some way of getting you, right? So this exam is more of a test of your determination, whether you're disciplined, whether you're labbing every night. I know Catherine's, always be labbing, right? So you can't be lazy on this, and you have to adapt. And that's probably the biggest thing, because you're going to hit points of studying where things get frustrating. You can't find Solutions, documentation may be wrong. I mean, there's all these roadblocks that get thrown at you, and you just have to kind of adapt and go around. And it's supposed to be hard, right? We hear the common complaint, oh, this BGP is so hard. There's so many BGP labs. Layer 2 is hard. I can't get this part. It's like it's supposed to be hard, right? It is not looked down upon you. It's not a bad thing, a bad strike against you because it's hard. It's supposed to be hard, right? Disappointment is built into this whole thing, right? They make it so most likely you will fail. It'll take you a couple of tries to finally pass the lab. They know this, and that's why you see a lot of people, they go to the lab once, they fail, and they're like, nope, never again, not doing that ever again, right? So they kind of know this is happening here, right? So it's built into the process. One way of looking at CCIE, and I talked about it to another Cisco employee a couple of days ago, is think of CCIE as a multi-year, multi-month interview for TAC. You're going for Cisco TAC, and just think of this whole CCIE business as the interview process, right? Now, why do I say that? You're never being given the full story. That's kind of like the diagnostic portion of the exam. So you're talking with the customer, they're saying, this does not work. I'm sure I did this. Are you sure you did this? When I was at a conference, I was talking to someone at Cisco TAC. She said, I will never believe what a customer tells me. I will only believe what I see in the show command. So if I don't see it on the screen, I don't believe the customer. That kind of sounds like what you see in CCIE. Another thing with CCIE studying, thinking about it in terms of TAC is at Cisco, we have so many resources. It just becomes hard sometimes to find the exact link, right? I know the resource is there. I just don't know exactly how to find it, right? So I'm sure for you guys who have been studying CCIE, trying to find that documentation for, I don't know, like MPLS, VRF, multi, whatever, right? So it can be hell, right? Finding some stuff, and you just have to deal with it. So what makes this different than CCNA, CCNP? It's the time limitations. It's the stress. Time limitation is, well, you got like 8 hours to do 3 parts. It's a crazy number of tasks. No sane person would even think about doing this in even a week of regular work, right? The stress added in, you're making mistakes. You're adding to your own troubleshooting because you're fudging, you're mistyping stuff. The breadth of topics and depth too. Certain things, it goes in deep, right? RIP, let's say. You think it's easy, but it might go in like really deep, and you go, what the hell? I've never even thought I could go that deep into this protocol. And maybe the most important differentiation is vagueness. Questions may be vague, answers maybe even more vague. You go through a workbook. I'll give you a good example. A certain vendor has a BGP section. Once you start going in halfway into the BGP sections, the answers get kind of really vague and incomplete, and you kind of have to figure stuff on your own, right? No workbook is perfect, but as you get more advanced with your CCIE studies, you start seeing mistakes and stuff, and that's actually pretty good. That's a good gauge of how your studies are going. But despite all this, I mean, it sounds like the deck is stacked against you, but thousands have passed, and as long as you're curious, you're playful about looking up stuff, you're not like, darn it, OSPF again, you should look at it as like, I get to play with virtual areas or virtual links across three different areas. Never did that before. Kind of cool. All right. Don't look at it as, this is stupid, why would I ever do that type of thing. Discipline. You're labbing 2 to 3 to 4 hours a night. As long as you're consistent, you'll get there, right? That has been proven. We've seen that over and over. There's sacrifice involved. If you scroll back or scroll down to John Shin's, I pasted something from John Shin. He talks about sacrifice. You're going to miss family outings, friends outings, stuff on weekends, your kids, that type of stuff. you know, and then resourcefulness. This is a big thing we see in the forums, in the Slack channel. Um, People ask questions that are easily Googled, you know, like what about this and what about this? It's like, and then all I do, or all the other people do, is we just Google for it and we'll shoot a link, and they're like, thanks. It's like, well, why didn't you Google for it? You know, it's you have to know how to find things. That's what they're testing you on, resourcefulness. Okay, mindset. This is the most important thing, and I think we'll stop here for a couple minutes to get the CCIE's advice on this.
I'll just add something in here about the mindset. There's going to be technology that you are studying during this exam that you think you'll never see in real life, or you just won't see in your job, any jobs you'll be in, or that you'll feel particularly challenged by, and it's human nature to kind of edge around it instead of dive deep into it. I know there were certain topics, like Matt, for example, was McGee. I remember him saying in the beginning he was scared shitless of, pardon my French, of MPLS, but he dived deep into it, and by the end of the track, he loved it. It was one of his favorite things to lab. For me, I spent 2 weeks on the most disgusting iSCSI config ever on an MDS. I hated it. I knew I would never see it outside of the worst corner case out off the lab blueprint, but I studied it and labbed it so hard that I pretty much couldn't do it in my sleep at this point. The mindset of a CCIE is you got to kind of go out of your comfort zone and experiment and try different things and lab every possibility. And even outside of the workbooks, like I went through all the workbooks and I got to the point where I was like, okay, let me just come up with crazy things to lab. And if I can, and yeah, I talked to somebody who had actually passed the lab. He's like, if you're doing that, yeah, one scenario of like OTV, FCIP, and iSCSI all bunched up together in the same topology, and I got it all working and booting from the iSCSI gateway. And my friend was like, if you're doing that, you're ready for the lab. Don't be afraid to experiment and combine different technologies that you're scared of and become a master of them. You should be labbing those foremost before you get to the stuff that you're more comfortable with. That's just kind of what I have to add.
To that point, the exam is not a best practice exam. It's not. It's you're gonna, like Catherine said, you're gonna be asked to configure things you would never configure in real life, and even in the workbooks, you'll be like, why would I ever do this? You know, why am I ever running this? But with respect to the route and switch exam, it's to test your understanding of the protocol. And if you ever gone through the workbooks, I mean, they teach you some pretty crazy. I mean, people always go to an interview like, oh, how large is the topology you manage? How large? You know, how many devices? But you look at the workbooks, the Nordic workbooks, the IME workbooks. They teach you the most advanced concepts using 5 to 10 routers. And again, it's not a best practice. When you go in, you have to understand it's not a best practice exam. What they potentially could ask you to configure would there's a possibility that you may not ever encounter that scenario in real life. And what they're testing you is your mastery of the protocols and your understanding of how they interact with each other, and not necessarily how you would deploy them in real life.
Exactly, and sort of adding on David's point on that is, you know, a question they may ask you, I mean, just very high level here, like they might ask you deploy so-and-so and so-and-so, you know, topology using only open standards, or it'll ask you like, you know, do this, you know, configure it so this, you know, MDS switch has an FC, you know, everything on this MDS switch has an FCID starting with blah, blah, blah. But if you don't understand how storage in general works, or you don't understand what's an open protocol versus non-open, or even like some of the ways to tweak things, like, you know, not just configure, but you have to understand how to tweak them. You know, you have to understand the protocol. You have to understand how to troubleshoot the crazy things they throw in there. And it's not best practice, but, you know, understanding the way they're phrasing those questions and go, oh yeah, I know I have to do that because that's the only protocol that supports what they're asking. That's the kind of thing that they'll throw at you, and you just, it's, while it's not a best practice exam, coming out of that exam, understand those protocols on a much deeper level than your average peer.
So let's talk about the phases of study. This is very generalized, but I think it fits probably a majority of people going into CCIE. One thing that people forget, and we have a link down here to Fabian's videos. He's got a really, really good video that he made for Cisco Learning Network. You should watch it if you're going for a CCIE. So Fabian, just really quick, he was my proctor at the Miami Mobile Lab. He works out of Mexico City. He's an SE 7X CCIE. And he was giving us a lot of tips about studying. And one major thing he talks about is people forget to get the support of their friends and family first, right? So before you start this, realize it's going to take a long time. You're going to be missing a lot of family outings. You're going to be basically almost shut off from the rest of the world, deep into protocols and stuff like that. So they should understand what you are going through, right? So get them to support you, tell them what it is. Just make sure they have your back, because it's going to really suck if you're already stressed out about CCIE. You don't need the extra stress from having angry family members and friends, right? So get them to support you. Our next phase is the resource gathering. So people tend to basically start hoarding like the books. Okay, what books do I get? What workbooks do I get? Start printing out stuff, start buying markers and notebooks to write in. So, you're gathering stuff, right? You're watching videos like this to see what you should gather. Then you're going to be looking into scheduling. People forget about this part, but what scheduling means is, okay, so right now it's January, and you're looking throughout the year and you're basically saying, okay, when do I want to take my lab, right? So whatever that time is, let's say you want to take it in December. So all right, you want to take it in December. You need to decide at what point you want to take your written. So I'm just going to say, let's say April, right? You want to take your written. And then you need to decide, when are you going to take your boot camp, right? Are you going to take it here kind of early? Are you going to take it here kind of like at the midpoint? Are you going to take it both, here and here? Maybe that's okay. Also, like, how are you going to lab? Let's say just for example, you're doing I&E. How are you going to lab the different tasks in the different sections? How much are you going to lab every day? So that's kind of like your scheduling game plan. And I'll let you know right now, whatever game plan you come up with at the beginning of your studies, it's going to go to shit as you go through your studies, and that's okay. It's expected. It's okay. I don't know anyone who started with the game plan, had it written down completely, and passed the CCIE and said, you know what, I just stuck with it and I passed, right? Things are going to get thrown into the mix. Work's going to come up. Your wife is going to have a kid. Your kids are going to get sick, and you're going to need to take them to the hospital. So things are going to get thrown in there. That's going to mess up with the schedule a little bit. But you should have at least some type of vague schedule. Like, okay, I want to take the lab around December or so. Then you're going to work backwards. We call this a reverse timeline. You start with the end and then you work forwards to present time. Yeah, no battle survives first contact with enemy. That is exactly right. So after you schedule stuff, then you start your reading and labbing. You're going through your books. Maybe you're labbing a little bit. I do suggest that personally, if all I'm doing is reading, certain things like protocols and stuff don't really stick. So let's say I'm reading about QoS, right? You're reading about the token bucket and policing versus shaping and all that. And, when you read it, it's like, does it make sense? Not really, personally. But then you do it in the book, and then you lab a little bit, right? 2 or 3 routers. Can you mark traffic? Okay, I can mark it. Can you drop traffic? Cool, I can drop it. So then this kind of thing where you read the book, you lab, you read the book, you lab, kind of going around and around. reinforces the learning, right? If you just read, it's kind of boring if you just read QoS. It doesn't really, in my eyes, it doesn't really start to make sense until you start labbing stuff. MPLS, yeah, you can read all about MPLS. It's only when you start labbing stuff and you start seeing like the different sections of your cloud start talking to each other, then it starts making sense and becomes a little bit more fun. You're going to take your written. Whenever you take your written, we'll have a whole section on that. After you take your written, start labbing the technologies heavily. Break it down like layer 2, OSPF, EIGRP, right? BGP, all that good stuff. You're going to lab all the different technologies. Then you're going to get into full labs, right? And I've seen some people start with full labs and they only do full labs. I think this is maybe not the best approach, but I mean, you can remember that counterexample stuff I talked about. There are people who do that, but what I like doing is doing all the technologies first and then doing the full labs. There is another method of studying where you ping pong back and forth between full labs and technology. So you kind of do this thing, right? So you take the full lab, you get hit with OSPF, you go back into technologies, do OSPF, you do another full lab. Let's say EIGRP kills you, then you go back to technologies and you do EIGRP. Both are valid methods of studying. So yeah, we talked about it's here, the full lab ping pong, technologies and full lab ping pong. And then the final act, or hopefully the final act, is before your lab, 30 to 90 days before your exam, things get really crazy because you have paid the $1,600. There's no way of taking it back. Well, you could pay the late fee or the fee to change it, but for all intents and purposes, plane tickets booked, hotels booked, you've paid the fee, no way of backing out, and you're scared shitless, and now the only option left is just to lab, right? You gotta lab. And what happens here is I've included, now this this picture here is for EVE Online. If you don't know what EVE Online is, it is a spaceship game that is notoriously difficult to play. And so this is comparing it to World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft, very nice difficulty curve over time, slowly goes up, not a big deal. This right here is the EVE Online curve. So it starts off, it's not too bad, and then it just goes crazy, and then people die, and then, So this is exactly like what you will find with CCIE. This curve right here is CCIE studying to the T. When you start labbing technologies, not a big deal. You start taking your full labs and you go, wait a second, I thought I knew OSPF, I just got killed here. And then what happens here in this section where people die off and fall, that's usually like their first lab attempt, or maybe the written, where they fail the written or they fail the first lab attempt and they never go back, right? So once you can get past that part and just say, F it, I'm continuing on no matter what, then it's, I won't say smooth sailing, but then you have a good shot at getting all of that. Okay. So that's kind of like our general overview of the phases of study. Now, a lot of people ask, how much do I lab? How many hours? How many hours do I need? Can I do it in 500 hours? Can I do it in 1,000 hours? You will probably lab somewhere between several hundred to maybe 1,500 hours of labbing. I haven't kept track of it. I tried to keep track in the early days, but I just got, it's kind of demoralizing to track the number of hours you lab. Now you'll hear people say, I lab 6 hours a day. I lab 8 hours a day, right? You'll hear people say that. But then you have to ask them, okay, what exactly is labbing? Is labbing just having GNS3 open and a terminal window up? Well, if that's labbing, I can probably lab like 12 hours a day, right? Or is labbing actually going through a lab and typing and looking up stuff, right? So if you can do, in my opinion, 2 to 4 hours of quality labbing a day. And NARBIC, I think most instructors say this, 2 to 4 hours of quality labbing. And you can maintain this long term. You will be in a good spot. Where people mess up is they do something like this. So Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday. Oops. So let's say this is the work week, and then this is Saturday and Sunday. I don't know why it's changing like that. Hold on. Okay. So some people, where they mess up, is they say, okay, Monday through Friday, I can only do like 1 to 2 hours, right? Can't do much because I have work, right? And then what they do is they say, well, I'm going to make up for it on the weekends by just going freaking nuts, right? 10 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday. And I've seen a lot of people say they try to do this, but after about a month, you can't hack it anymore. And the reason for this is we'll talk about having a cheat day, having some type of rest period. This is unsustainable, right? So you can try what other people do is if you can only do 1 to 2 hours after work, you may want to adjust your schedule. Wake up a little bit earlier before work to get some reading done. Maybe work out something with your boss to leave early. Do something to up this because this is 5 days a week, right? And then your Saturday and Sunday, you're away from work. You kind of should be resting and recuperating from work. And so now you're trying to slam in 10 hours of labbing in there along with family and friends and stuff like that. So over the long term, this, unless you're really, really disciplined, this kind of falls by the wayside. You're going to do so much labbing, you're going to destroy a couple keyboards. I know I have. And the keyboards, the K120 Logitech keyboards, if you want to have the exact keyboard as the lab. But I've destroyed the keyboards, the keys on my laptop. I can't even read the letters anymore. So they're worn out. That's normal. That's going to happen. And then however many hours you're labbing, as I said before, as you approach your lab time, your lab date, the desperation, you're gonna be labbing like insane amounts. 2 years ago when we did V4, we had the RouterGods D-Day stuff. Some of you may remember that. We were labbing, and I kid you not, we were doing 2 Cisco 360 labs a day, which is, and we did this over, I think, 60 days. It was insane. We got so good at these labs. We got through layer 2 and frame relay in like 8 minutes on certain labs, not all of them, but certain labs we got through. And that's just what you're going to need to do when that $1,600 lab date is creeping up on you. Do I need to lab every night? You should, a little bit. But if you want to have a cheat day or a reading day, like a Sunday, just take it easy for a little bit. I recommend that. Just you need a day off, or kind of like a light day where maybe you just read, or maybe you just like lab something completely different, right? That's what I do sometimes. If I'm labbing OSPF several days in a row, I'll just take a day where I just go, okay, I've done a lot of OSPF, it's driven me nuts. Let me just pick BGP today. Kind of like a different day or a cheat day. Okay, so that was kind of like an overview of the phases of study. I'm going to stop for a little bit and let the other CCIEs take a stab at it.
In terms of study and labbing schedule and goals in general, I would sort of reiterate what, or just agree with most of what Humphrey said. Just set some achievable goals. You'll know what those are, what are achievable and what aren't. And because there will be many disappointments, and simply, just don't put yourself in a position to fail. You can avoid it, and if you're anything like me, you'll feel bad or depressed, and that's just not helpful. It's a marathon, not a race. Now, that being said, as my fellow study group members can probably attest, I went many a night without sleep, drank acid, worked the next day, gave up most of, not all of my social and recreational activities through the process. Alienated many a friend. I'd go to the grocery store and see my photograph in the back of milk cartons. So sort of my way of saying I wouldn't do that if I were you. Don't be that guy. Don't be me. That's sort of the way I operate, which is to say barely. I'm sure I was no fun to be around at work or home or anything during all of this, but the important thing is to just do what you can when you can. And it's really just as simple as that.
For me, it was long periods of study. I mean, it was every waking moment, not every waking moment, but I mean, there were periods where I struggled real hard with, do I really want this CCIE, or do I really want to just sit home and just watch YouTube and Reddit all day, right? And it was an emotional journey. I mean, with regards to study, yeah, 2 to 4 hours is about right. I mean, if you're like doing it too much to the point where you're like consumed and you're just doing that all day. I mean, for me, someone like me, I really enjoy packets, right? I was really passionate about it. It got so bad to the point where like, like I would talk to this about girls. I mean, I would talk to girls about this and they'd give me this weird look. But I mean, if you just do 2 to 4 hours, go slow and steady, don't do what I did. I mean, I was just beast mode on 100% of the time, all the time. I mean, if you can't do it 2 to 4 hours a day, slow and steady, I mean, there's so many more important things in life. I did miss out on a lot, right? There was a lot of sacrifice there. Take it slow. It's not a race, whether you get there in 2 or 10 years. I mean, make sure you enjoy the journey along the way, right? But yeah, take it slow. Just 2 to 4 hours is usually a pretty good pace to set yourself at.
I'm just going to add in here. So I spent the first year I was studying, I was getting ready to get married. So I was trying to balance wedding planning with studying, and I probably did about 3 or 4 hours every day, and on the weekends I tried to do at least 6 hours. Towards the last 9-10 months, I stepped it up a bit, and I gave up a lot of sleeping. It's been probably sacrificed my first year of marriage, mostly studying. It is sacrifice. It is going to be kind of you're going to feel isolated, and one good thing about this group, I know Humphrey just said, no, there's no magic bullet, but I think the closest thing to a magic bullet is probably the community we have here, and the fact that everyone encourages each other and bounces ideas off of each other, and we all make each other approach things in different ways or think of things in different ways. And, outside of this, though, you have to remember that there is a life, and make sure you get support from all your family and friends while you're doing it, because you might not see them for a while.
The other thing to understand is that not everything's going to fit in a nice little timetable. You're not going to be like, okay, day 1, I'm going to study EIGRP, and I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to understand it completely. Day 2, or next on week 2, I'm going to study BGP, and then after that, I'm going to move on. It doesn't always work like that, right? You're going to come back. You're going to come back. You're going to be like, oh, okay, I didn't quite understand this concept here. I'm having a little trouble with redistribution. It's taking me a little longer to understand the LSA types. And again, it's not going to fit in a nice little timetable. Go at your own pace, but make sure you master the fundamentals, be a master of the protocols. Don't just study for the exam. Again, like I said, your study schedule is not always going to fit in a nice little timetable. Yes. Take it slow.
Okay, the resources that RouterGods that we will give you, that we offer to everyone. 2 main things are the topologies along with the study groups. Our GNS3 topology is very easily found at RouterGods.com. They're also pinned in the CCIE room. So if you go to routergods.slack.com, and I hope everyone watching this is part of the Slack room. If not, actually I know there's people that are not part of the Slack room. If you have never seen, that's the private room. If you have never seen this screen right here, what you need to do is you need to send an email to not 5150. I'll type it in the chat room. NOT, shit, NOT 5150 at gmail.com. Okay, so you send an email there. This is really weird. I'm typing in the keyboard and every keystroke is going, it's like going off the keyboard and going to the mouse. Okay, well, not 5150 at gmail.com. Just send an email to that, use your first and last name, and then say add me to the Slack room, and you will get access to this. Once you get into this room, you're going to add, so you go to channels and you add, click CCIE, you're going to go into the CCIE room. Pinned items in the upper right corner, you see this eye right here. You click on that eye, you're going to get this sidebar. And look at all the cool stuff we got in the sidebar, right? So we have links to the topologies, links to YouTube pages, links to Jeff's study tracker. We'll talk about that a little later. So lots and lots of stuff, right? So our topologies, pre-made topologies for GNS3, for Micronics and the INE workbooks. I have updated the Micronics workbooks and hopefully by next week I'll have all of them updated for GNS3 1.4. The INE workbooks still need to be updated for 1.4, but for the most part they work. And I know a couple of the people in the room right now, they used the GNS3 topologies that we did as, you know, kind of like their primary or a big chunk of their studies. So it's definitely helped a lot of people out. Every couple weeks I get a random email just to my Gmail account saying, hey, I used your topologies, I passed my CCIE. It's like, whoa, that's pretty cool, right? So very, very helpful. It's going to save you a lot of time with your studies. Now, common complaint, or not complaint, common comment that I get from people is, well, GNS3 doesn't do layer 2 or it doesn't do switching, so I'm not going to use it. Okay, so if you're looking at a car and it doesn't do mountain driving very well, but it does everything else completely fine, you know, city driving, awesome, great gas mileage, lots of carrying capacity, but the only thing it doesn't do well is drive in the mountains. That doesn't necessarily mean the car is bad, right? It's just that one point, you're gonna have to find something else. So a lot of people make a big deal of GNS3 layer 2. You can do layer 2 if you have to finagle some stuff, but you can use GNS3 for 90% of the topics and it will work just fine. For the other stuff that it doesn't do, or maybe you can't get it to work, do a rack rental, use viral, use something else, right? So proven technology, a proven thing that we give to people, and it's definitely helped a lot of people. Let's see, we've got a question here. What does not 5150 mean? 5150 is a psychiatric hold for California. It's the code for like a crazy person, so I'm not crazy. It's a nickname I got in the Sheriff's Academy. So they're like, hey, are you 5150? I'm not 5150. Well, that's your nickname. So they have lots of nicknames for me. Okay, so we've got a multiple tiered Slack room setup. Many different types of rooms for CCIE people. So to start off, we have the main CCIE room. So you just add yourself to CCIE. Anyone can join this room. This is vendor neutral. So anyone interested in CCIE is cool to join there. Then we have 2 private rooms. We have the CCIE-INE and we have CCIE-NARBIC. These 2 rooms are invitation only. You need to send me a receipt or a screenshot of the login, something to prove that you bought it. If you pirated the workbook, you're not getting in, or buy the workbook to make up for it, right? So these rooms are for specific questions for these particular workbooks, right? And then finally we have the beast mode room. What the beast mode room is we know you're serious, we know you're close to your lab date, it's coming up, you're labbing every day. So a lot of times during the week, we have our labbing sessions. We will post the labbing sessions to the beast mode room and not the CCIE room. Now, we're not too consistent on this, but kind of the idea is during the weekdays, the serious people are labbing in with the beast mode hangouts. And then on the weekends, we kind of like liberalize it a little bit. I don't know if liberalize is the exact word, but we allow other people to join in by posting the links to the hangouts in the CCIE and the general rooms. So kind of anyone that's sort of interested in CCIE joins in. So to be in these labbing sessions, you must share your screen. You can't just be lurking in the background. And you should be labbing or asking questions and stuff like that. Okay, so those are our two main deals. And so just to reiterate, we have some other channels too, but CCIE Narvik, CCIE INE, those are for the two vendors. We have the Beast Mode room, that's for the serious labbing people. And we have the nightly labbing session, so that's the different resources that RouterGods can provide with you, along with all the things that are pinned in the rooms themselves when you click on the eye. Okay, so getting into the money portion, I'm just going to tell you straight out, it's going to hurt. It's going to cost between $10,000 to $15,000, but it's going to be spread up among like a year, year and a half, or something like that. So thankfully, you're not going to need to pay this all up front. I have a link to a worksheet, a Google Sheets worksheet that you can click on. You can input different numbers, but generally, if you say that it's probably going to cost you, it's going to take 3 attempts. You're going to do a boot camp. You're going to get some workbooks. Then the $10,000 to $15,000 mark is kind of is a good number. Right? Now, even though it costs a lot of money, the largest cost is not really going to be the money. It's going to be the time. All those thousands of hours you're not going to make back. The money part you're going to make back. I've also included that in the CCIE, the worksheet there. You input your salary that you expect will be increased. So let's say your salary is going to be increased by $30,000, let's just say. Then you're going to make that money back in about 6 months. So it's going to be worth it in the long run. But you need to keep in mind the time, right? Now, if you can get your work to pay for some of this stuff, like the workbooks and the boot camp and all that stuff, that's great. That's awesome. If you have to pay for it yourself, just remember that most of the vendors have some type of, they can usually work with you with discounts, payment plan. Tell them you heard it from RouterGods. They will probably give you a discount. So there are many ways of dropping the price. I know Micronix is really good about that. We had a member who couldn't really afford to pay the boot camp all up front, because I mean it's kind of a lot of money. So they worked with him to set up a payment plan, right? Now I know some people get discouraged because this is a common thing. They tell us Cisco employees, well, Cisco pays for your boot camp and your training. Cisco pays for your lab attempt, so it's really easy for you Cisco guys to get CCIE. It's just, I would argue that if you're not paying it for yourself, that it's actually more difficult, because that really shows you how motivated you are. If someone else is paying for your lab attempt and the lodging and the flights, it's not a big deal to fail, right? It kind of sucks. Yeah, you spent the time studying, but it's nothing out of your pocket. It's a lot different when you're spending the $2,500 per lab attempt to go there, the flights and the rental car and all that. That hurts. My remote lab in Miami, that hurt to fail that one because that rental car was expensive. Flight to Miami, hotels in Miami aren't that cheap, so that stings a bit, right? You're looking at workbooks, either Micronix or INE or both. You're looking at rack rental tokens, the boot camps. Those are kind of the approximate prices there. And if your computer sucks, you're going to need to buy a computer to lab to run GNS3. So somewhere between $1,500 to $2,500. If you want to go the labbing server route, you're looking at $1,000 to $3,000, depending on how much memory you want in there. We'll have a separate meetup about that. But you can go sky's the limit, 128 gigs, 8 core, all that good stuff. And we have a member, John Shin, down here. Had a conversation with him. Like, so his journey took about 2 years, and he estimates that he's spent $20,000, but definitely worth it. Right? You can see his answer down there. So the reason his was 20,000 is he went to the lab a couple of times, I think 4 or 5 times. So the more lab attempts you do, the more it's going to cost. Okay, for the CCIEs in the room, talking about money, your thoughts?
I don't know what money is. I have so little of it. I'll table this for those who do.
So about as far as money is concerned, I started out trying to pay for it on my own and wasn't very happy with my job and ended up changing my job, but I purposely went towards a company that I knew would support fiscally my CCIE and the education behind it. So I kind of was a little more strategic about it, but it definitely would have taken me much longer if I had to save the money and pay for all the resources completely out of pocket. So I mean, if any of you are thinking about changing jobs, in the future before you start your CCIE studies, if you have an option between two jobs and they pay very similar, or one's a little bit lower but they're willing to pay for your certification and exams, content, material, it's almost worth it if you're very serious about your CCIE to go ahead and go for the job that'll pay for the extra education.
For me, I spent about 2,000 on my lab. Just for the lab, I mean, just for the lab setup. So it's about, and this was in like 2011, is about 1,000 for the machine and the parts, and then about 1,000 for the switches. Now, I mean, you can get those servers for dirt cheap. I mean, you could replicate the entire INE setup, 20 routers, the 4 physical switches for like under 1,000. I think you buy those blade servers, those giant blade servers for like $600, and they come equipped with a whole bunch of RAMs, and they got like 2 CPUs. If you want, I mean, you can spec out some very affordable options that can allow you to basically set up your lab. Yeah, but for me, I paid mine all out of pocket. And Humphrey's right. For me, it was about 10K. I took a boot camp. I paid for all my training material, and I put in the time. But I mean, really, there's if you really want to learn, there's no excuse. I mean, all the resources are out there. There's people to hold your hand through every piece of technology. I mean, the time we live in now and the time when CCIE was just out is a completely different time, right? I mean, back then there was no INE, there was no NARBIC, there was no IP expert. I mean, really, all the resources are out there. If you really want it, the only thing that's stopping you are the excuses you tell yourself. But with regards to price, it's still cheaper than a college education, and the return on investment is going to be phenomenal.
Yep, good stuff. And another thing is, if you're a fan of INE, one suggestion to keep the cost down is wait until a holiday, like a July 4th, a New Year's, a Christmas, or something like that, because INE likes having specials. Also, remember to subscribe to their Twitter and Facebook. Twitter, Facebook, right? Because what happens is they advertise a lot of that stuff over Twitter and Facebook and email, and there are different ways of getting you. So they'll often offer something like 2-for-1 rack rentals, half price workbook, buy one, get one free boot camp. They always do that type of stuff. So if you want to keep your costs down, wait for a holiday. Or actually better said is, don't buy your boot camp and your workbooks right before a holiday, because what's going to happen is you're probably going to buy it and then they'll lower the price. Now, you might be able to talk to a salesperson and say, hey, I bought it just the day before. Can you cut me a break? They might be able to work with you. I've seen it happen, but don't assume that they will do that for you. right? And always remember, prices are negotiable. If the boot camp is $5,000 or $4,000, you can't afford it right now, you can always call them up and work something out. Salespeople are very flexible, especially at the end of the month when they have to make their quota. Um, it's not exactly going to work with Micronics, because with Micronics, the salesperson and the admin lady and the scheduler is all the same person, Janet. But it will probably work with IP Expert and INE because they employ salespeople, right? So always remember that you don't, if you can't afford it, tell them, and maybe they could help you out.
Oh yeah, actually going off that point, I purchased both INE and IP Expert for CCIE Data Center, and I will say that the IP Experts Black Friday sales were crucial to me. I had a certain amount of budget approved by my management for a boot camp, and my boot camp ended up being half off, like the Black Friday, and I was able to use the extra money to get rack rentals at half off as well. So if you time it right and you're strategic and you get a solid number that your employer can pay for, or at least a solid budget in your own mind for your own money, when you do that, you can get more bang for your buck by utilizing those sales. I know that IP Expert, at least for data center, they were really, really good. They were half off on Black Friday. I know that INE has Black Friday sales as well. So that this time around, like this year, after I finished my data center, I actually ended up utilizing it again and getting like all the videos I needed for route and switch next.
One common question we get, we'll just get this out of the way, is what's the one book I can read for CCIE? And there is no one book. That would be actually awesome if there was one book. It would be a huge book. Um, but yeah, we have a list of books here. And also I put in the official list that you can click on. That's the Cisco, like what they recommend. But unfortunately, yes, you do need to read books. You will need to take notes. I know a lot of you don't like reading, but you just have to do it. Our list is the Cisco Press, the version 5 by Narvik, the official cert library. That's the volume 1 and volume 2. I know some of the reviews haven't been that great. There's typos and stuff like that, but okay, if you know Narvik, there's going to be typos. And well, this is being recorded. I don't want to say what the other thing I want to say, but so whatever book you pick up is probably going to have typos, especially when you're talking about at the level of CCIE. So it just kind of goes with the territory. The Routing TCP/IP Volume 1 and Volume 2. Now, these are kind of old, but I still like them. You just have to kind of pick and choose the sections because some sections will just be really, really old. The Volume 2 is supposedly being updated. I see a date of May 2nd, 2016, so coming up soon. The BGP book, the BGP Bible, I call it, Internet Routing Architectures by Halibi. Great book, awesome book. And the OSPF Bible is the MOI OSPF, Anatomy of an Internet Routing Protocol. Those are the good books. There's also like the QoS Cert Guide and the MPLS and VPN architectures. Those are pretty good too. But if you had to pick like the 5 books to read, that's kind of my list. I know other people will have a different list, and we can spend a couple minutes afterwards talking about that. Now we know the books are expensive. They're heavy and all that stuff. You have a couple options here. You can save money a little bit by getting the Kindle and iPad versions, or you can do the whole Safari Books online thing for $39 a month. And the Safari Books Online, you get 340 Cisco Press books along with the preview editions. I kind of like the preview editions. They're kind of like the rough cuts. I think that's exactly what they call them, the rough cuts or the new cuts of upcoming books. So all the Cisco Press books, you can get them for it actually works out fairly well, even if you spread it out over 6 months or 12 months. Let's see, $39 times $480 a year. And there might be like some discount you could probably get by prepaying for a year. I'm not too sure about that. So Safari Books Online, very, very good stuff. Yes, you will need to read, and no, there is no one book for CCIE. Okay, favorite CCIE RNS books, something that you liked that I did not have in my list from the CCIEs in the room.
Well, I think that bibliography is basically the same thing I went over. The Comer's book was another one, but other than that, as far as the reading part, yeah, and, it still amazes me. People tend to get hung up on the reading part. It's just part of the process. I still read, I still review, and I still forget. That's just the way it is, and just accepting it and figuring out a way to tackle it. It's really no different than the labbing in that regard. Just pick a schedule and stick to it as best you can.
For me, I mean, I use I like to read from vendor independent sources. So I kind of use the Juniper. The Juniper, they have free ebooks. They call them Day One books, and they have like free study guides too. Those were pretty good in giving me a different perspective, different vendor's perspective on the same protocol. There's no right or wrong way to read or study. Some people learn differently. Some people like other people's different writing styles. But yeah, for me, I use the Juniper books, and those actually help me with my CCIE studies. I'll post the link there. I'll post the download links to their study guides. Again, it's not a vendor promotion, but I think they do provide some quality reading material with respect to understanding the open protocols like BGP, OSPF, and RIP, and even MPLS VPNs. But I'll post the link. Again, there's no right or wrong way to read. Or, maybe some people swear by routing TCP/IP Volume 1 and 2. I didn't particularly enjoy it. Some people swear by that multicast book. I forgot that one. There was like a Cisco multicast book. I didn't particularly enjoy it. So I mean, whatever you do to read, just make sure that you are able to understand and absorb the material from the person or book you're reading from.
Very good point. I did not know about the Juniper ebooks. That's pretty cool.
One thing, not the CCI route and switch, but one thing Hughes also really pounded on is IP multicasting. I think it's by Bu Williamson. He said that that was a really good book for understanding multicast for him. It's an old one, but it's a good one.
Yeah, the Bo Williamson book is fantastic. And also, I did forget, there's a MPLS Fundamentals by, here's the name I'm going to butcher, Luke DeGain. I've not read through it to that cover to cover, but that's got some very concise and specific MPLS explanations on there, which I think tend to be a little bit more hard to find, actually, in terms of the regular bibliography that we're looking at.
Cool. Good to know.
Two more I would add. Routing Bits Handbook, which is an ebook. I can't remember the guy's name.
Oh, Ruhan.
Ruhan, thank you. Yeah, think of it as it's not the one book to learn the CCIE, but it is the one book you really wish you could take with you on the CCIE. It's kind of a CCIE Cliff Notes. And a non-technical book would be Your CCIE Lab Success Strategy. It literally is a non-technical guidebook, and it's written on much of what Humphrey is talking about now on how to study for the CCIE exam. And it's published by two double CCIEs. I think they both got their CCIE, the pair of CCIEs within a year of each other. So they know something about studying.
Cool. Good to know. And the routing bits, if you buy routing bits and you mention RouterGods, there's a code. I think it's actually RouterGods. He will give you 25% off because he likes us. Okay, let's go into the documentation. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for the success strategy, that book is one I would actually recommend not only you read it, but if you have a spouse, serious girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, I'd recommend they read it too. Just kind of let them know what you're going through.
Okay, let's talk about documentation and other resources. So the books are kind of like the official reading material that you're doing, but there's also side reading that you're going to be doing a lot. And any type of documentation or resource that we find, we pin it in the CCIE Slack room. If you go to the CCIE Slack room, you click on that I, you'll see that one of these links right here, the HackPad CCIE resource list, you click on that, and these are kind of like the tidbits of knowledge or the links to certain things or drawings and stuff like that. So every little, like it even has like Hugh's super secret YouTube music playlist. So so you can listen to the same music Hugh is listening to. So this is a very important, and this will grow as time goes along. The reason we have this, the reason we keep this is because we use the free version of Slack. After 10,000 messages, the stuff kind of scrolls past the top and you technically can't get it anymore unless you pay an obscene amount of money. So that's why we kind of save it by pinning it and putting it in a HackPad link. There's a link I put in there to the Cisco online documentation. Pay especial attention to the configuration guides and any examples that they use, because chances are if in its example it's an example that someone took time to make, you may see that. There may be a decent chance of seeing that in the actual lab or maybe even the written. So when you take your written, it's a little different in studying, but you will find that a lot of the answers to the written are verbatim in the documentation. So it's kind of that you really need to read the documentation. The Cisco Live 365 on-demand library, excellent resource. You click in there, you can search by CCIE, and you have like a whole bunch of sessions that you can, how to approach the troubleshooting, part of the CCIE, how to approach the config, how to study, that type of stuff. It's free, and it's the same. It's just a recording of the talks at Cisco Live, just they upload it afterwards. So very underutilized, um, very underutilized resource. And a lot of people say, why even bother paying for the $2,000 or $1,500 or whatever it is for the pass when you can just watch it afterwards? And there is some truth to that, right? Because I found the quality of the video recordings to be pretty decent, not too bad. Okay, let's talk about the written exam. We have the written exam, some workbooks to talk about, boot camps. We'll get there. We'll get to that. So my view on the written has changed. I think a lot of people's view about the written have changed in the last 2 years or so. Before, the written was considered just this easy, real easy thing you just take before you take your lab. You just, you wait a little bit, take the written, it's going to be simple, and there you go, right? So the written has changed a little bit. It's kind of tough. People have failed. I have failed it a couple times. So don't underestimate the written. Don't think that, okay, it's just a written, no big deal, right? One, it's $400, so it's going to hurt when you fail it if no one's paying for it. Two, the topics in the written are a little bit different than topics in the lab. Things like ISIS, things like certain layer 2 WAN technologies are thrown in there. A lot of IPv6 that you may not see in the lab necessarily. So it's a completely different beast. So my recommendation has changed. Now, what I recommend and what a lot of people are starting to recommend now is you study for the written almost as a separate entity. Just get that crap out of the way so you never have to deal with ISIS again, at least until you go for like service provider CCIE. So that's our recommendation now. Now, of course, just like before, every example has a counterexample. There are some people that go, oh, yeah, I like ISIS, so I'll study it. No big deal, right? So it's $400. You take it at Pearson VUE. And the thing that passing the written gives you, it doesn't give you a cert, so please do not put CCIE written on your resume. A lot of discussion about that. It lets you schedule your exam. Lets you schedule your exam. So you can't schedule an exam. You can't look up the dates for lab exams until you pass your written. After you pass your written, you have 18 months to take your first lab attempt. So 1.5 years. If you fail, then you have 12 months to take another lab. Now this 12-month thing, this is very, very important. You have to take a lab, you have to do a lab attempt every 12 months after you're written, or else it expires. I ran into this problem when I was about to schedule my lab attempt. Boom, popped up. It's been more than 12 months since you've taken a lab. Your written is now expired. Too bad. Right? And then in total, your written lasts 36 months. Right? So let's see, you have 18 months. Let's say you kind of like you stretch it out all the way till 18 months. You take your lab, then it kind of resets the timer, gives you another 12 months. Then you're looking at 30 months. So you could take another lab within 6 months. So if you stretch it out maximum amount of time, you can eke in 3 lab attempts on one written. Now, if you want to take your lab attempts more often, you can do that. But this is if you wanted to just stretch it out. Very broad range of topics. I have links in there that you can check out. Now the written is changing. It is changing July 25th. So it's going to be version 5.1, more topics, and then they're going to add in a section called emerging technologies. Emerging tech. So I would suggest if you're going for CCIE, probably take your written before July 25th, just so you don't have to deal with that stuff. All right. So now my new recommendation, a lot of people are recommending just take your written, get out of the way, and don't worry about those topics until you do another CCIE track, because it's definitely a different ball game in terms of the written, at least for routing and switching.
Well, speaking to the difficulty of the CCI written, Ethan Banks, co-founder of Packet Pushers, recently posted something about how he always has trouble every 2 years, passing, recertifying the same way. In fact, the last time he did it, as he writes on his blog, it took him 3 times, and it's just, I think you're right. It's sort of a totally different beast that one must conquer now. So, just wanted to add my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, there's also a time limit placed in here. So you can't, it used to be you could just brute force the written, like take it every other day. Fail, take it again, fail, take it again. And they've added in kind of like a rate limiting thing into the written, and also the lab itself. So you can no longer do that. So just keep that in mind. If you have an expiration coming up, you don't want to be like me and try to do it at the last minute and then fail, and then whoops, you're not allowed to take the written again until 30 days later or something like that. So just be careful with that.
I think the written. I think personally for me, the lab was much more. The journey preparing for the lab was much more fun than preparing for the written. But you have to do the written properly to be able to have the foundation for the labs. If you go in bashing, I spend more time reading than I did. Basically, I did have a fair amount of command line practice in, but I spent much more time reading and wrestling with the concepts, and then applying them on the command line. It's something you have to do. You can't call yourself. You can't go into an expert exam. No. Think, I've seen this scenario 1,000 times, and bash out the commands. They're gonna test. They're gonna shake you up, and they're gonna shake you up in ways that really make you think about how the protocol works. And you're gonna have to really have a concrete understanding of how they work. And if you don't do the written properly, it's going to be a very expensive lab attempt. So, those are my thoughts and comments there. It's not fun. The theory is not always fun, but it's something you have to do. And there's going to be a lot of reading.
Yep. And let's see, we have a comment from Darius. A lot more a lot more people recommending taking the written close to the exam. Nope, I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to say that in general, as the written stands right now, I would not I would not do that. That's my personal feeling. Just because maybe in V4 different beast. V5 written is a different animal. But that's my personal opinion. Okay, workbooks. Let's talk about workbooks. Okay, so let's remember that people have passed with every vendor's workbook. And there is a big percentage of the population that buy more than one vendor's workbook. So lots of people buy INE and NARBIC. There's kind of a saying, start with INE, finish with NARBIC. Uh, I don't see that many people go from NARBIC to INE, but there are some. And also there's IP Expert as well. People have passed with IP Expert. Right? So there is no magic bullet in terms of workbooks. Now, since I've purchased both INE and Micronics, I can give you a couple thoughts on the differences. So the INE workbooks, they're online, so you can log on to a page, you can look at your workbook. They used to be PDF. I'm trying to find the link to download the workbooks now. I think they got rid of it. If you maybe found the PDF link, let me know. But I think they've gotten rid of the ability to download it. Now, nothing says that you could just print the page to PDF and get it that way. Now, if you have the PDF version, there doesn't seem to be any copy protection, so you could like put it on your iPad or whatever, not a big deal. Have it on another computer. You bought it, so it's yours. INE has a couple mock labs, a couple full-scale labs included with their workbooks. They may call it a different version of the workbooks, but they do have mock labs. Now my problem with INE, it's not a problem, just a concern, I guess you could call it, is it almost seems to me that different people created different sections of the workbook. So let's say OSPF, right? You go through OSPF, the explanations are really good. You're like, wow, I'm learning a lot from doing these exercises, very clear explanations. And then you go into a different section. I won't name the section, but let's say you go into a different section afterwards and you go, there's like no explanation. They just give you the answers. They don't tell you why, right? So that may or may not be a bad thing because it could force you to look up why. It could force you to do more show commands and kind of fill in the spaces. But don't be surprised if the different sections are a little inconsistent, right? So, like MPLS will feel different than layer 2. You could have lots of different authors for different sections. Okay? So that's INE. But once again, people definitely pass with INE workbooks. Micronics. The one thing about Micronics is the workbooks are lock lizard protected PDF files. So what this means is you get a certain number of licenses, certain number of computers you can load this onto, and then if you want to load it onto more computers, you can still do it. You just have to contact Janet. You have to contact Micronics to issue you an additional license. Okay, so some people don't like that. Another thing with Lock Lizard is depending on the screen sharing program you use, you fire up Camtasia or you fire up something, Lock Lizard will pop up and basically say, nope, exit out of your screen sharing program, and it will close the workbook. So some people don't like that. The people who have the Surface Pros and any type of like writing tablet, and if you like using OneNote interferes with Lock Lizard. You get a nasty message. So just something to keep in mind. I have been able to put the files on a Samsung Note, like the big Samsung Note tablet and an iPad, no problems at all. And actually in a lot of his overseas boot camps, students have figured it out, and he's completely cool with that. It's very nice to have the workbook in an iPad and then lab on your computer. It's very cool. Cool thing about Micronics is the explanations are, in my mind, a bit better than INE's. The color coding is a bit better. Yes, there are typos, and someone in our group is fixing that, but just keep that in mind. If you're looking for more of, you know, you know nothing about OSPF, well, by the time you go through all of his workbook tasks, you will know a lot more about OSPF. It's kind of like a built-in book, like a built-in regular book, into kind of like weaved into exercises. So that's kind of the differentiation between the two companies there. So for the CCIEs in the group, your thoughts on the two companies, or if someone's done IP expert workbooks, I would definitely want to hear about how they look compared to these two.
For me, just Micronics and INE, actually in reverse order, INE and then Micronics, just as you mentioned earlier. I use them both. Each have their different points of emphasis and different teaching methodology. I can't imagine a world in which they don't both exist. And I think even one interesting thing is I think used together one after another, or even at the same time, they actually complement one another a little bit, I think. The INE workbooks also offer an assortment of large-scale labs, which is one particular benefit, I think. But I don't think you can go wrong with either. As I said earlier, the worst you can do is learn something. And if you use them both, fantastic. I think that's the path well traveled.
For me, I used INE and IP Expert. What I did was I had built out my lab and got the INE workbooks, and I said, oh, the IP Expert workbooks come with the bootcamp, so I did the IP Expert bootcamp and got their materials. The approach is different. INE is more like step by step. Okay, we're gonna build and we're gonna do. It's like micro labs where you do every little bit of technology. IP Experts labs are basically they build in chunks, so they cover technologies, and then they'll ask you to do a set of tasks, kind of like the lab, instead of the INE's micro labs where you configure each little bit of technology one at a time. Again, you can't go wrong with both. They're just different approaches to teaching the same technologies. And this is for route and switch. The standards are pretty old. BGP v4 has been out for a long time. OSPF's been out for a long time. EIGRP's been out for a long time. Even MPLS has been out for quite a while now. So you can't go wrong with both. They're two different approaches to teaching the same technology. And again, there's no magic bullet. You can't go wrong with both.
So I took a different track than David and Matt. I did data center, and I did actually try both. I will say that I preferred one over another for data center at least. And I've actually had this conversation with Humphrey before as well. Like, different vendors are actually stronger in different tracks. So if you're not doing the classic route and switch, there might be one or two vendors that are just really strong in that particular track, like collaboration, wireless. So it does pay to do your research, but typically, like something like core route and switch, the more resources, the better, from what I've seen.
Cool. Good to know.
One other quick benefit, I think, to using more than one vendor, if that is what people ultimately decide to do, is that it helps mitigate the possibility of simply remembering a given lab. It really sort of tricks your brain into thinking a different way. I know, especially with the ubiquitous INE Advanced Technology Labs topology, you do at a certain point begin to just remember the entire IP scheme, and there's benefits to that too. But I think going outside your comfort zone as well is really helpful.
Absolutely, I agree with Matt there. If you've done those same labs, 1,000 times, it becomes more of a rote memorization than actually active thinking about the task you're trying to accomplish. If you've done, I need to make sure traffic goes in from my AS from this router and then exits from this router, another router. and you've done the task a million times, and you know the IP scheme, you know which route maps to apply. I mean, you're not really thinking about the technology. I wouldn't call that lab time. You're just basically punching in commands into a keyboard, and you're not actually thinking about it. That's the benefit of going with different vendors. But I mean, for me, I prefer to stick with one vendor first, master the technology, have a strong handle on technology before going to a second one.
Good stuff. All right, let's get into the boot camps. All right, so you've decided on a workbook, maybe two workbooks. Now you're looking at the boot camp. You're kind of getting into your studies. You're thinking, okay, let's talk about boot camps. Now, do you need a boot camp? That's one question we get a lot. Yeah, I'm good. I don't need a boot camp. Sure, you don't need to go to a boot camp to pass. But just by looking at the list of CCIEs in the room, I know David went to a boot camp. I know Matt went to a boot camp. I know Catherine went to a boot camp. So I know John Shin went to a boot camp. I know Martin Schumacher went to a boot camp. So I'm trying to think, out of all my CCIE friends who did not go to a boot camp. And I can't think of one. So, I mean, that should tell you something, right? So why go to a boot camp? I think the main thing that helped me when I went to NARBIC's boot camp is just to realize after that first assessment on Monday that I forgot what score I got. I got like a 70 or 80 or something like that, right? So just to show you that CCIE is possible, right? It'd be a different story if I got a 0. If I got a 0 on the assessment, I might have to rethink my priorities. But if you can get some points on a test, then okay, you're on your way. At least it's not a big fat 0. At least you're not completely stupid, right? So just to realize that it's possible. And also, what was also interesting is just to see how you rank in terms of other people, right? Because you will see some people get like I'll just do it, 11. You'll see some people get 5. You'll see some people get 50. You'll see some people get 90, right? So it kind of lets you know where you rank. It's a good test of knowledge. It's an independent test of knowledge. I think that's what's important is it's someone else showing you what you do or do not know. It's very easy to trick yourself at home when you're labbing and say, oh, yep, I got MPLS. No problem. I'm like the god of MPLS here. And then you go to a boot camp, you take the test, whatever assessment test or do some labs, and you find out that no, you are not as good as you thought you were in terms of MPLS. So that's a very, very important. Also, the last two things, networking with other students, just making your friends. I'm sure people get jobs out of that boot camp. You trade business cards, you have drinks afterwards. So that part is very, very, very important. It's I mean, it's the only reason I go to NARBIC's boot camp now. Not That's so bad to say. I like just talking with other students and interacting with everyone. And I steal the food from NARBIC because we'll talk about the food and stuff. So my recommendation is go to a boot camp. Yes, it's expensive, but go to a boot camp. It's an awesome experience. Okay, so the other question we get, when do I go to a boot camp? Do I go early? Do I go middle? Do I go late? Just before the lab? There's different schools of thought. Now, my viewpoint is it's different because the way INE runs a boot camp versus Micronics dictates how you should position the timing on this. Okay, so with Micronics, you get free workbooks. You also get two assessment labs. If you were to take your boot camp really, really early, like let's say you're just starting off and you take it the first month you're studying, those assessment labs are not going to be worth very much to you because you will not know how to do them. And I saw this in Malaysia when I went through NARBIC's boot camp in Malaysia. There are guys who just is too early. They couldn't get out of frame relay. So those assessment tasks, those assessment labs are worthless for them, right? So Micronics might be something where you kind of take in the middle after you've studied a little bit and then maybe take again towards the end. With INE runs their boot camps a lot differently because it's kind of like a mock lab and you kind of follow along, and then every couple hours you stop and you're watching someone lab. You're watching kind of an expert do his thing, which, it's a different way of teaching, right? So I can see how I&E, and I can say this because I took I&E Service Provider Bootcamp. So I can see how I&E might make more sense taking it later in your studies, maybe like a couple weeks before your lab or something like that. So it kind of depends on the type of boot camp or the vendor of boot camp. Now, if you're doing a boot camp, you're probably thinking about, okay, does it make sense to retake a boot camp? And I always say yes. And the reason is the first time you go to any boot camp, it's going to be just completely nuts. You're going to be trying to remember everything. All these terms are going to be new. And so if you come back a second time, it's going to make a lot more sense. Especially like, I'll give an example, NARBIC's boot camp for the OSPF day. If you're not that good with OSPF, that stuff hits you like a ton of bricks. I think the BGP lecture is also pretty rough if you're not good with BGP. So the first time you go to that boot camp is just like, holy crap, you're just like furiously writing stuff down. The second time is a little bit more relaxed, so it's you definitely feel like you retain more information. Now, most of the vendors will offer some type of free or cheaper retake for the second time and third time and after that. Just remember that some of the resources you won't get on the retake. So like the rack rental, maybe like space available. It's kind of like, I'll try to get you a rack rental, but don't count on it. The exams, the assessments that NARBIC gives, you definitely won't get that the second time. Unless he really likes you and he lets you take his assessment. So the instructor always gets his own assessment. So I kind of luck out a couple of times when I go and he's like, hey, well, I'm not going to do it. So here, you take my login and do it. So that's pretty cool. And there's other things that you may not get the second time. So just keep that in mind. So absolutely, definitely take the boot camp. So I'll get to comparing the two boot camps, and then we'll get to some questions. I already see a question in there. So comparing the boot camps, I&E in Bellevue, pretty badass room, futuristic, screens everywhere. They got this like cool server rack there that glows orange. It's pretty nice, massive room. It's right across the hall from Cisco, same floor as Cisco. They're on the other side. I think that's more than a coincidence. So it's more like a lab walkthrough throughout the whole week, and you take breaks at each section, and then you watch the instructor configure. So good experience. I like it. It didn't last as long as NARBIC's. It kind of, my particular one, I think we got out at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. Now, recently they've changed this to kind of mirror what NARBIC does. Coincidence or not, I don't know, but they're kind of making it last a little bit longer. And as far as food, you're kind of on your own device. You go out and you buy your own food. Micronics, on the other hand, also with I&E, in terms of the boot camp I went to, which was service provider, I think half of my room was Cisco, which I guess might make sense if they're on the same floor as Cisco, but huge portion of my class was Cisco. Okay, Micronics. We're talking about Glendale specifically. No projector, it's all whiteboard, and no projector, all whiteboard. Workbooks are included, so that's a little different than I&E. Your workbooks are not included when you get an I&E bootcamp. However, if you ask nicely enough, which I think some people did, they got workbooks, but generally they're not provided. So with Micronics, they are provided, and you do get two pretty cool, pretty good Cisco 360 assessment labs on Monday and Thursday. So you're getting two, like, I guess, officially sanctioned labs Monday and Thursday. You get two racks. You get the Micronics rack with the 360 rack. A lot of people forget about the 360 rack. A lot of people forget. Late nights. I think the latest I have been at a Micronics boot camp, the latest was like 11:30. I think that is the record in terms of lecture. Now the latest night was 4:30 a.m. and that was with actually no, the latest is I just spent the night there because that was the assessment lab on Thursday. So that's the ugly one. That was when I got locked in. And you get homework, which INE does not give you. So get homework, and you get free food. So I think that's Narbic's secret. He just like feeds you so much that you want to die or something. So okay, let's take a look at the chat window here. Francois says, "Oh, INE is not in Bellevue anymore." Okay, well I guess we can scratch that. Sad face. Old info, not there. All right. So I guess you can ignore all that. Let's see. And Francois also says, is there a reason for having boot camps in Thailand or Malaysia? Cost, combined tourism. So, so Narvik does have, he does offer boot camps in Malaysia. I think once a year. He's never done Singapore, but yeah, I decided to go to Malaysia because never been to Malaysia, so I'm basically adding on tourism on top of that. That's one way to do it. There are people who go overseas for boot camps, not necessarily Micronics or INE, and they study or they take a boot camp in country. That's one way of doing it. I would just be careful with picking a school that's reputable, and that's all I'll say about that. We have a question. Can GNS3 simulate a CCIE lab exam? We will get to that in just a second when we talk about GNS3. Okay, thoughts from the CCIE group about the boot camps?
I think you need to challenge yourself. However, you do that to get out of your comfort zone. So one of the best ways I think of doing that in terms of the CCIE process is means placing yourself in a situation in which you're not driving the car. The instructor who's driving this thing is going to provide a host of challenges in the form of, say, lectures or assessment labs over which you have no other choice than to take it all in and listen and respond and to test yourself. So that's incredibly valuable. It's a small price to pay given what you can get out of it. And then also the social aspect, as you mentioned. You're bound to meet and make new friends, people who are just as crazy as you are in that whole thing. So that's an added bonus.
Yep.
I would definitely say that the boot camp did help me out. About 5 months before my lab, it did help me with confidence and show me what I really needed to actually work on, because you get so focused on labbing certain technologies or going through workbooks and going through cycles of different technologies that going through a boot camp and hitting the major technologies on a track all in like a 5-10 day period is just a really good review. I can't speak highly enough about the boot camp I went to, but I also had the pleasure of sitting in Narvik's boot camp, and I did notice his was a little bit of a different format. He kind of makes some assumptions about your skill level before going in there. So one thing I'd kind of add to what Humphrey mentioned about Narvik's boot camp is that from my experience of previous boot camps, it doesn't start out slow. So if you do end up choosing Narvik's boot camp, be sure to do Foundations 1 and 2. It's a recommendation, he says in his email, but it's actually pretty serious, because if you don't do those before you go, you might be missing a few fundamentals, and might save you some more time if you're able to actually pick up right away.
Yeah, don't be the person who can't get layer 2 up in the assessment lab. Definitely work on the fundamentals. No DMVPN. I think you don't have to be an expert at it, but you don't want to be lost on your first day. So I think that's good advice.
Again, if you have the money, if you can afford it, definitely attend the boot camp. I went to IP Experts. The value is more than just technical instruction, like Humphrey and the rest of us has said. You meet like-minded peers, and it's really an invigorating experience. At least for me it was, because, I mean, when you're on this journey, chances are most people around you aren't even going to know what a CCIE is or even really understand what you do. And to be able to be in the same room, like Matt said, with people who are just as crazy, who are just as motivated, it's a really refreshing experience to to be able to basically speak geek with your other peers. The other thing is, it exposes what you don't know. I mean, you can do an MPLS lab, you can do a BGP lab hundreds of times, and the instructor may end up hitting on topics you've never even heard about, right? You've never run into in the workbooks, right? And it's going to expose, at least for me, it's going to expose what you don't know. Yeah, like Humphrey said, right? You could say, "Oh, I've done this MPLS lab a million times now. I've got it, MPLS." It doesn't work like that. I mean, if you go into these boot camps thinking you're a god or a master of these technologies, you're going to walk out and your asshole is going to be the size of a wind tunnel. It was an eye-opening experience for me. So definitely, if you have the cash, definitely try to attend one.
Yep. And also, another thing is, I've seen this a couple times with Narbic's boot camps. You have a guy who goes in and, it's over his head. By the second or third day, he's gone, right? And then they're on Facebook, they're playing video games or whatever. And it's just, it's just a waste of money. It's a waste of time. If you go there, at least, okay, maybe it is over your head. Still keep notes. Still try to lab. You know, get your money's worth out of it, because it's not cheap. So you might as well stay engaged the entire time. Okay, we're almost there. How do I lab, right? How do I lab all the technologies? What's the correct method, or what's a good method? So there's different methods. Overarching thing to keep in mind is right now the routing and switching lab is all virtual, right? So you go to lab, there's the lab exam. It's all whatever their IOU, you could call it viral. It's all virtual, right? So there's no real gear anymore. So keep that in mind when we start looking into how to lab. Uh, Main thing is the blueprint is huge. I've got the link right here. You can click on that link and go to the official blueprint. Lots of topics, right? And you just need to split them up into manageable chunks, right? So let's say layer 2. You're not going to learn all of layer 2 in one day. This is just freaking nuts, right? So what you do is you take layer 2 and you chop it up into like the different spanning tree flavors and, section, different, chop it up with the, like, let's say 10 pieces, 10 chunks, and then study each chunk, right? That's one way of looking at it. Jeff Denton has created a very awesome study tracker. It is pinned in the CCIE room. It is an Excel sheet, a Google Sheet, Excel sheet, that breaks out all of the workbooks. I think I can expand this here. Oh, that's about how much it will expand. There we go. Okay, so what this does is it breaks out all the topics of the workbooks, and you can track yourself by how many times you've labbed it, when was the last time you've labbed it, stuff like that. Right, so very, very good thing to use. So you look at your sheet and you have like an overview of, wow, it's been 5 weeks since I've done OSPF. Maybe I should do a couple labs just to jog the memory. Okay, so that's his awesome study tracker. He took a lot of time making that, so it's definitely a very good tool that you could use. Okay, there's two approaches to labbing. There's the Fabian single-minded approach, and then there's kind of like the approach that other people use. So the 7x CCIE, what he told us at Miami was he just does a single technology until he's absolutely sick of it. Yeah, he like, let's say BGP, he'll do so much BGP every lab, he'll read about it until he's like, okay, 100% got it down, and then he told us he never touches it again. And I'm like, what? Like, what planet are you from? But that method has worked for him, right? Yeah, okay, he's got 7 CCIEs. I'm not going to argue with that, right? So that's his method. I think the method that a lot of other people do is they kind of look at the different technologies. Let's say OSPF, EIGRP, BGP, let's say. So you lab each one. Let's say you lab OSPF until you get to, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe you're like a 7, right? Complicated stuff may give you problems, but you could set up basic stuff. You're fairly quick at it. Like you're good enough, right? You're within like the top 20% of the world, let's say. You're decent, right? And then you go, okay, I'm going to go to EIGRP until I get to a 7. And then maybe here you kind of revisit OSPF a little bit. Right? So we call this like the ping pong approach. You go forward, you go back, go forward, go back. And why do you need to go back? Well, I explain it like this. Let's say you got some glasses of water, right? Now when you study, you're kind of filling up the glass with OSPF, right? And you fill it up, you fill it up. And then you go over to like BGP and you start studying and you fill up the glass. Well, while you're studying BGP, some bastard came over here to this glass and poked a hole down here, and now it's like leaking out. So while you're studying BGP, this is shrinking down. So that's why you need to revisit older technologies, because you're slowly forgetting them as time goes on. Now, there is like a crazy ass formula that tells you optimally how much time you should spend on each technology and how often you should go back. I think it's one of those INE blog posts that you can read up, and it's just the old theory or the old science of over time your memory fades, so you just need to revisit old stuff. That's all it is. Okay, so those are like the two approaches. Now another question or the questions you should ask when you're labbing, right? You're going through the workbooks, you're labbing. You should ask yourself 3 or 4 basic questions. Can you configure like a basic version of it? Like, can you do basic OSPF? Can you do basic BGP? Configurations. Nothing too crazy. Can you at least like fire it up? Can you do basic VPN? Okay, that's kind of like step 1. Do you know the default values, right? Very, very important to know the default values of things like timers, metrics, stuff like that. Do you know the common show commands to troubleshoot? Because there is a troubleshooting part of this exam. Troubleshooting. Also, the thing with show commands is it's not a common question, but Cisco likes to do something like this. Configure your routers and the protocol such that your show commands match this, whatever it is, right? So backwards thinking here, right? Configure it so it matches that. And if you've never done that type of question before, it's kind of scary the first time you do it, but after a while it's okay. And then also, does the technology interact with other technologies? So, give you a good example. DMVPN, right? How DMVPN works with OSPF versus EIGRP, lots of differences in how routing protocols work. These two routing protocols work over DMVPN. A lot of nuances there. So you need to know the differences and be prepared for which way the lab is going to throw you. And most likely, the lab is going to throw you into the hard, if it's between 2 options here. So if in your lab you have an easy route and you got the hard route, guess which way the lab is probably going to throw you? And if you had to pick, they're probably going to pick the hard way. Okay. Questions about how to lab, the space repetition, how to study the, chopping everything up, and also Jeff's study tracker, and also comments from the CCIE group.
For me, I didn't have a particularly well laid out methodology or whatever, but I did tend to tackle the things or look at the things that interested me, and it was just a lot less work, I found, quite naturally when I did that. And then that gave me the confidence, at least, to try other things, to do things that I wasn't necessarily as good as let me see, like QoS or multicast. A chill just went down my spine. So my methodology was haphazard, but at the end of the day, you tackle everything eventually. But certainly, Jeff's study tracker is fantastic if you set yourself up for a sort of more goal-oriented methodology like that, then that's a wonderful tool to use to track your progress.
For me, there's the practical approach first, right? You can understand the use cases of the technologies, and then you'll be able to understand, oh, why do these knobs exist, right? Why do we have a BDR DR election on a broadcast segment, right? If you understand, and this is again going back to mastery of the fundamentals, for point-to-point type segments, when an OSPF, I don't want to get too technical, but anyways, understand the use cases. If you try to go backwards and say, how would I use this technology in a real life? How would I implement this in real life? And then you go backwards and try to build it out. That's one way to learn and lab the technology. The other way is things like when you're doing your workbooks, build it as fast as you can, and then you may find you forget or you're missing something, or you fat-fingered something in the configuration, and that will end up being your troubleshooting. In the real exam, it's I think Jeff Benton told me something that's a really good point. It's that there are no bugs. There's only misconfigurations in the exams, right? There's things that are missing, things that would happen to you while you're practicing. Let's just say you fat finger something, you missed a statement here, or I forgot. Oh, wow, how come my routes aren't being advertised? Oh, I forgot to add a cluster ID for my route reflector, right? Or maybe it's mismatched. Maybe I forgot to turn on LDP right here, or maybe it's a mismatched VRF import and export policies. Those are the types of problems you run into in the exam. There's no bugs you run into exams. Build it fast, and then learn how to verify. One thing I did while I was going through labbing was basically I did every like show command, and then basically I said line by line, I want to understand what's going on in the output, what's happening. All right. So build fast, troubleshoot slow, and learn how to verify. The other way you can do it is basically for every protocol, right? Router RIP, router BGP, router UIGP, router OSPF. Under every major routing protocol, this is for route and switch, okay? Bear in mind. For every routing protocol, do a question mark and say, do I understand what this next command is for? Because every knob there exists for a reason, and there is a use case. Now, some of them may be corner case, but they don't just put it in there just because. So, yeah, those are some ways you can approach the labbing. But again, you have to verify. You have to learn how to verify.
Virtualization overview. Yeah, this is where we get into the GNS3 versus viral. Okay, so getting back to that black and white thinking, it's not GNS3 versus viral. You're probably going to use both. There are cases for using both, and if you had to track the percentage of time you use each tool, GNS3 is probably for a lot of people going to come out on top in terms of time, just because you can load it up fast. It's got the topologies built in. It doesn't cost anything. So it has its uses for quick and dirty labs, and even some larger labs. Where viral comes to play is, okay, you get a little bit more layer 2. Not to say GNS3 you can't get layer 2, but it's just more difficult to implement. Okay, so both. A lot of people will use both, but there are also other tools out there which we'll talk about. Okay, so we'll just run through the gamut here. GNS3, everyone knows it's free. It goes on almost every operating system out there. Fairly easy install as long as you're talking about Windows and OS X. Resource requirements, as long as you have that idle PC tuned out, not a big deal. I would say it's kind of like a medium resource requirement. If you have a Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, you can pretty much run almost every GNS3 topology out there. Not a big deal. Where people get into trouble is they blame GNS3 when you have a Core i3 and like 4 gigs of RAM, right? And people say, well, GNS3 sucks because it doesn't run on my computer. Well, you shouldn't be blaming GNS3. You should be blaming your computer, right? Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM. If you have that SSD, throw in an SSD for the hell of it. GNS3 for the vast majority of your labs will be just fine. Pre-built labs, we have them. So that's a big thumbs up on that. Now, included devices, you're going to have to add the iOS, right? So that's kind of like a gray area, right? You just have to find it. The 7200 router, 15 dot whatever M9 image works just fine for most of the labs out there. And the boot up time is fairly fast. Now with Viral, Cisco's official tool, it costs some money. It's a yearly subscription. For 20 nodes, it's 200, 30 nodes, 300, and the academic version, which gives you 20 nodes, is $80. Now we've gone through the install. I recently did a bare metal install of Viral. The install is still hard. And if you don't know Linux, it's hard. It's going to be very hard for you if you don't know Linux, if you're not used to command line. So just keep that in mind. Resourcing requirements is going to be high again. We got someone unmuted. Okay. So Viral, we know it costs money. We know the installation is very difficult, especially if you're not used to Linux. And resource requirements, there are some pre-built labs, especially for INE. INE has a topology built for Viral. Includes a lot of devices, so big thumbs up on that. And the boot up time it's kind of slow. So there's multiple ways of running Viral, which we'll talk about. But if you're running it within ESX, you got to boot up the ESX first, assuming you don't run it all the time, and then you have to boot up Viral. You have to load up the topology, through VM Maestro. Then you have to start the simulation. So there's a lot of hoops to go through. Now, if you like Viral but you don't like the whole setup process, there is CCIE Lab Builder, which is basically hosted Viral in the cloud. So it's per hour, and the price isn't too bad, even though I have it in red. But if you look at it, 500 hours for $1,000, $2 an hour, it's not too terribly crazy. And you still have to build your own labs in there, but it's going to boot up fast because it's in the cloud. It includes all the devices, so none of the real drawbacks with Viral. Now there is a little hiccup with the prices. So if you buy the 100 hours, you have I think it's 6 months. I think it's 6 months to use the 100 hours. If you don't use the 100 hours in 6 months, it just goes poof. If you buy the 500 hours, I think it's 12 months to use everything. And if you don't use it, it goes poof. Now another thing is the time only starts when you start the simulation. So you can draw the topology, like drag the routers in. That's not counted against your time. The time starts when you click play and the terminal windows start coming up. Okay, so hosted Viral. So we got a question, Viral licensing allows that. No, this is CCIE Lab Builder is Viral that Cisco is hosting for you. So this is the same as Viral, except Cisco's taking care of the hosting. Then we have something called CAML, or CML, Cisco Modeling Labs. This is probably not going to be used for most people because it's just the price is insane. I priced it out. The base price was $177,000 list. So if you get 50% off, you can get it for 70 or 80 or whatever. This was with the 100 nodes and the XRV license, so it's kind of crazy. You need a very beefy server. You're going to be installing it on-prem at your company. No pre-built labs as far as I know, but it does include all the devices. So it's kind of like a super version of Viral with support. It's kind of the way I look at it. Now, another option that people like using is they just go, it's kind of like the INE. One of the INE's recommended ways is you just take ESXi and throw a whole bunch of CSR 1000 Vs on it, and you do it that way. Okay, so that's something that people use. As I said, GNS3, you have Core i7, 16 gigs, more if you want to run like really crazy labs, should be just fine. Viral, I really wouldn't run viral with anything, 16 gigs I would consider kind of minimum for viral, especially if you're going for CCIE level labs, and especially if you're going to do like an ASA or XRV, then you should start looking at 32 gigs and beyond. Really crazy stuff. I know people running viral on 64 gigs, 128 gigs, 256 gigs. That's kind of the level of processing power you're looking at. It can go bare metal. It can go Fusion, Workstation, Player, ESXi. Uh, you know, whatever way you decide to do is, there's many different ways of installing viral, right? Once again, the install is kind of crazy, especially if you don't know Linux, but I mean, most people can figure it out. CCIE Lab Builder, I have a link there to someone else's review. Roger Perkins is a member of RouterGods. He doesn't, because he lives in England, he can't really attend any of our stuff, but he passed CCIE and he did a pretty good review of Lab Builder. And Cisco Modeling Labs, if you want to click and know about that, I put the link there. Okay, let's see here. I have a comment from Matt. Matt says he primarily used the GNS3 with the Micronics typologies and the CSR 1000 Vs for INE. So yeah, we did all the work for you in making the topologies. You just need to buy the workbook, click on GNS3, click on the lab, and it's up and running. You may have to tweak like the idle PC, but it's pretty minimal stuff. Questions and comments from the CCIE group?
I guess Matt's tapped out. I guess Catherine's out too. If you're not Linux savvy, I'm a little Linux savvy, so I went down the Linux route. I've used Qemu and KVM with GNS3. So that's how I built out my topologies. If you're primarily focused on CCIE, just take the easy route. You want to be up and running and labbing as fast as you can. So personally, and GNS3, it'll get you like 90-95% of the way there. Yeah, I mean, personally, I wouldn't go down the viral route, especially if you're not Linux savvy, like Humphrey said. GNS3 is going to get you pretty far, especially if you're starting from your CCNA. You can build it out and grow it as you get more advanced. But I don't really have much to add there.
Yep. Also, one thing to keep in mind, even though currently I don't like viral that much, I know Cisco is throwing a ton of resources into it. So I know that in the future they're going to have a completely web-based GUI, so you won't need to go through VM Maestro anymore. So that will be pretty cool. They do need to make the install a lot better to catch it up to GNS3 in terms of ease of use, but there's nothing to say that, I mean, if they were to throw like millions and millions of dollars at it in dev time, that eventually it could be like a really cool product. It might take 6 months, might take a year, might take 2 years, who knows, but it is another option for people out there, especially if you're queasy about using images, finding images for GNS3, because some people aren't, it's amazing to me, but there's a group of people out there that aren't used to grabbing and finding stuff from whatever resources out there. So we'll just say it like that. So there's a selection of people out there who still haven't used BitTorrent, who don't know what it is, who aren't used to finding iOS versions. Okay, another option is rack rentals. Ooh, rack rentals. So My thing with rack rentals is don't go crazy with rack rentals, right? So in version 4, rack rentals was a big thing because the topology was physical and you wanted to kind of match it. I still have 1,000 tokens with rack rentals, and I think most of the other guys who passed CCIE using INE, they have several hundred tokens of rack rentals. So that should tell you something right there. You're going to overestimate on your rack rentals, and you're going to have lots and lots left over. Okay, so that's kind of like the picture. You pass CCIE, now you have 1,500 tokens. What do you do with it? I guess you could let a friend use it. You can't cash it out. So yeah. So now one thing that happens with rack rental tokens is INE did this where they devalued the tokens. So it was almost like a 2 to 1 or a 1.5 to 1. So the tokens that you purchased got you a lot less time uh, after a certain date. So they did this a couple years ago. So just remember, once you have tokens, you're kind of locked into their system and you're kind of at their mercy of what they want to do. Now the thing with rack rentals, people will like it because if you buy a lot, it can be cost effective versus buying a server to set up viral and specking out the memory and the Core i7 and all that. So if you buy a big chunk on a special, it can work out, but you got to use it. If you don't use it, it's gonna just not be worth it to you. And kind of think of it like a fitness club. A lot of people sign up for gyms and fitness clubs at the new year for the New Year's resolution, and they don't go. So similar concept here. Scheduling. One thing to realize is scheduling can get kind of crazy during certain times, and you may not be able to get the rack that you want. And I'll have like a INE interface walkthrough just so you can kind of see that. Cool thing about rack rentals is the topology will or should be exactly the same as the workbook. Exactly the same, so that you can just fire up the rack rental, open up your workbook, and start labbing. You don't need to remember like, okay, instead of fast Ethernet, it's gig Ethernet, or interfaces are different, different numbers or stuff like that. So you got INE, you got IP Expert, you got Micronics. The Micronics one's kind of hinky because there's no real system of getting the rack rental. You just have to call and say, hey, do you have a rack, or email. INE probably has the best system for rack rentals. You can see right there. That's the current as of like 2 hours ago. You can see I got like 947 tokens. So if anyone, I don't know if I can transfer these, but I'm not using them anymore because I do everything in GNS3. You can see it costs 5 tokens. I think it's 5 tokens per hour. And so you just multiply by however many of hours, and there you go. And different labs cost different amounts of tokens. And they have specials where you can get like 2-for-1 tokens or 25% off tokens, whatever. Okay. So that's kind of like the main interface there. And then to schedule, it's pretty cool. Click on this picture right here. This is how to schedule. You pick a date, you pick the hours, and then you block off like time. So it's a pretty cool interface. Probably cost them a lot of money to set that up. Okay, so that's rack rentals. Rack rentals becoming less of a thing now with the all virtual lab. Used to be like really, really popular, but now less used. Okay, we're almost done. Study groups, big thing. Okay, so the big thing with studying for CCIE is no one's going to understand, very few people are going to understand what you are doing, especially outside of the networking world. Even in IT, they're going to be like, why would you go for that? It makes no sense. So to combat that, we have our study groups and also our nightly study groups where we motivate each other. I guess you can also call it demotivating each other. We said, dude, why aren't you taking your lab next week or something like that? And we're also kind of looking at each other labbing, and it's it can be a very good judge of whether you are ready for the lab or not. So I'll give an example. Um, let's say we know someone is scheduled for the lab for next month. They're in our study group, and everyone shares their screen. So we're kind of looking, and we can kind of say, you know what? You maybe should lab this section a little bit more because we can see that you're struggling a little bit. Show commands, whatever, maybe it's speed. So we can easily tell just by looking at your screen and what you're typing and how you're approaching a problem. We can tell if you're ready or not, right? So that's skill verification. And also lab creation. So, if let's say you complete a lab, you could give that lab to one of us and we could just tweak something and turn it into a troubleshooting lab, right? So we can, that's another tool that we offer. It's not used a lot, but it's something we can do if you're close to your lab date, kind of like make some troubleshooting things on the fly. And we do labs every night. Yeah, almost every night. We have a labbing session every night for the serious CCIE guys. And on the weekends, we let other people go in. Questions about the study groups? That is for sure. And most of the people, maybe all, maybe close to every person who has passed CCIE within the last 2 years or so within RouterGods has participated in the study group. So that's pretty good. We become your family away from your family, your very dysfunctional family.
Absolutely, I agree. I think with regards to the study group, I mean, they are going to be a social and emotional outlet. Again, like Humphrey said, it's going to be an isolating experience. There's no, I mean, outside of IT, even outside of networking, as Humphrey said, there's going to be very few people who understand what you're doing. You're not turning heads when you say I'm a CCIE. When you tell someone you're a doctor or a lawyer or a CPA, everyone knows who you are. When you tell someone you're a CCIE, sometimes outside of the IT industry, you'll be getting blank stares. Or maybe they won't even understand the magnitude of what you have achieved. But yeah, I mean, these social groups, these study groups can be an important emotional outlet and emotional support system. And it's important that you keep in touch with these guys. I mean, they really keep you motivated. They really keep you going. And most of all, they keep you accountable.
Yep. And I'll give one story from 2 years ago. We were in our D-Day study group, so we're all studying hardcore for version 4 because it was ending. And we were doing INE BGP labs. And there's this one particular lab where they give you an answer and it looks correct, but if you were to go on another router and verify, the shit don't work, right? So we're trying to verify it, or I'm trying to verify it, it's not working. And I'm like, hey guys, are you running into the same problem? So everyone else, like 4 other people, start labbing it and they all hit the same problem. So now you know it's not you're doing it correct. It's the freaking book that's wrong, right? So instances like that where you're tearing your hair out, where you're going, is it me? Okay, am I screwing it up? Is it the documentation that screwed up, or did the vendor screw up? And when you have 4 people hit the exact same problem, that's a lifesaver, because if you didn't have those 4 people, you'd be spending like 8 hours trying to chase your tail, just seeing if it's working or not. So every night we've got study groups happening. Okay, lab scheduling. This is the last part before we get into some advice from the CCIEs, both written and live. Once you pass your written, you can schedule your lab 240 days in advance. So that's a lot of time. $1,600, you don't get charged right away. So the money is charged when you hit the 90-day mark. So why do I have mark? So At the 90-day point, you are charged. It's pretty straightforward. So you put in your credit card, but it doesn't actually hit until 90 days. Now, some people say, okay, do I go to RTP or do I go to San Jose? Personally, I like RTP, but remember that counterexample part, Matt went to San Jose and passed. So, there's lots of stories where people fail in San Jose and go to RTP. And I'm sure there's stories of people who fail in RTP and go to San Jose. So I think it just like it's freaking luck. I don't think it's actual like you can predict anything with that. So the determination should be how much does it cost to get you to RTP versus San Jose? Time zones, are you going to be fresh if you go to RTP because you're going from west to east? Now, there's also a counterexample where Catherine did that and didn't get very much sleep, is not used to time zones, still passed. So who am I to say what you should do, right? I like the proctor in RTP better, but some people like the proctor at San Jose better. Just kind of depends. One thing is the doc CD. If you are away from San Jose, you may not have access to the doc CD, or it may be very slow. Okay, so the RTP exam, doc CD, no bueno, 404 error, and shit out of luck. So, things like that can happen because it's a VPN back to San Jose. Lunch. The lunch at San Jose is you're going to the cafeteria, so you're not losing time, but you're going away from the venue, kind of. The lunch at RTP is catered in. So you get a lot more time talking with your proctor at RTP. Is David Blair. So you can kind of pick his brain a little bit. David Blair's an awesome guy. He'll give you lots of like motivational tips. And maybe it's demotivational, but he'll say like, I've seen the same person 18 times or 13, 18 times. But as long as you keep coming, you will pass. And we're like, okay, I don't think I want to go here 18 times, but he does say that. So, uh, I think your chances of passing are equal if you go San Jose or RTP, but just keep in mind the costs and the other things. Common question we get asked: am I ready to take the lab? The hell if I know if you're ready or not. If we don't watch you lab, we don't know, right? So we have people say, well, I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. I've done all the I&E books. I've done all the micronics books. The only way we can objectively say if you're ready or not is you lab something and we watch you for like 5 minutes, right? That's the only way we can say. And even if we say no, most CCIE candidates will just say, well, F you, I'm going to take the lab anyways. So it's a really tough call to say if someone is ready or not. But I think for the most part, most of the guys in our study groups, if we watch someone lab for about 10 to 15 minutes, we can kind of tell if it's going to happen or not with fairly good accuracy. We've been fairly accurate with these predictions. And a lot of these predictions are kept private for obvious reasons. But if you ask us, am I ready? Share your screen, and pick some. We'll pick some random lab, and we'll kind of watch you, and we could say if you're ready or not. Now, no one's ever 100% ready. Sometimes you just have to schedule it and just it's cliche, but you just go for it. And a lot of people say that you'll never be 100% ready. It's going to take too long, so just have to schedule it. If you want to change the date, as long as it's not within 90 days, free. No big deal. Change the date. If it's within the 90 days, you have a 45-day mark. Later than 45 days, $350. If it's within 45 days, it's going to cost you $500. There are mobile labs. I have a link there. There's like mobile labs in Miami. Thumbs up. Miami's really, really cool. I like that mobile lab, even though I failed, but it was a cool place. $1,900, but it may save you more money in the long run because you're not paying more for the plane ticket and the hotel and stuff like that. So they have mobile labs all around the world, like Shanghai, Singapore, Mexico City, lots of places, cities in Canada and stuff like that. So mobile labs are a good option. I would wait a little bit because the mobile labs do not have the double monitors yet. So maybe wait like 6 months or so until they roll out double monitors everywhere. Okay, we have a question. Can you talk more about the dock CD, please? What do you find yourself using it for? I'll tell you exactly what I'll find. Um, so, because you're, um, so in the lab, uh, it's a very stressful environment. So the stress causes you to forget shit that you practiced. I'll just make something up here. Let's say PPOE. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, the syntax for PPPoE. I mean, I can't remember it off the top of my head. So you can look in the doc.cd, pull up the example, and kind of go off that. Um, things to check yourself on. Like there was one time where I completed the lab like 2 hours early. So I'm not going to just freaking leave 2 hours early. I'm going to go through each point and look up the doc.cd for each one of the tasks, or try to, and just make sure that I did it right, or what I thought the metric for that is the correct metric. Stuff like that as a double check. You probably won't have time to use the doc.cd. Well, I won't say that. I did use the doc.cd a couple of times during troubleshooting, but troubleshooting is just so fast and so crazy that the doc.cd is going to be pretty rough pulling it up. Actually, one tip I will give you guys is before you start the lab, open up the doc.cd link just to save yourself a little bit of time when that happens. So people start the lab and then they hit a question where you need to look up the doc.cd, and then you open the doc.cd. Yeah, you're going to lose like 30 seconds, a minute of that time. So use that. We're getting to a tactical question here, but have that open before you click the start time. Okay, question is, do you use an actual doc.cd for practice? No, it's all online. So Matt says he picked himself up 7 points by checking out the documentation. So that 7 points is huge. Okay, questions about lab scheduling or comments about lab scheduling. From the CCIE group, the guys that passed, was there a time where you actually thought you were absolutely 100% ready to take the lab? Or did you just say, F it, I'm close enough, I'll give it a shot?
It wasn't that I was ready to take the lab and pass. It was that I was just ready to take the lab and see what happened for the most part.
Same here. I mean, I didn't pass my first time around, but you got to give it a go. I mean, you study all those hours, you study and you study, and you're never going to feel 100% ready. But at some point, you're just going to have to give it a shot, right? I mean, you won't know until you try. I mean, there's some reasonable amount of preparation you have to do, right? Go through the blueprint, make sure you at least understand and be able to configure all the technologies listed in there. But yeah, I mean, I never felt 100% ready when I took the lab. But with regards to scheduling, route and switch is pretty easy. When I scheduled my route and switch exam, it was open probably every day of the month that I looked.
Yep. And also, if you schedule RTP, they do offer it on the weekends at RTP, which is kind of cool. I don't know if they still do it, but when I was taking it, they did. Okay, let's just take some advice from CCIEs. So I have the two links here from Fabian, the 7-time CCIE. This is probably one of the best videos you can watch for preparation. It talks about how he does it. John Shin, a couple years ago, passed. He was in my study group and talks about how he views studying and the time and the costs and stuff like that. John went to the lab, I'm thinking it's either 4 or 5 times. Okay. Mike Marvell, his story is very interesting here. I met Mike 3 or 4 years ago, San Diego, Cisco Live. It was his 8th or 9th attempt. He passed that day. And he passed after a power outage. He was in config, and the power outage just killed all the labs. And most people would have said F it after that, but he went back into it and finished config and passed. Now, interesting story. According to Michael, and I have no reason to doubt the story, the proctor went up and said, "Okay, bad news is power's out. You're going to have to redo your config portion." It's like, oh crap. Good news is you're going to get the same lab. It's like, okay, that actually sounds cool. So not as bad as he thought it was. So you can read his thoughts on that. So you got to think, this guy went to the lab 8 to 9 times, right? That's pretty crazy, right? A lot of people don't go back after their first fail. Right? So this guy went back multiple times, probably way beyond after most people would have given up. So he gives quite a couple good motivational tips. And then we have Luke, our CCIE based in Australia, who works for Cisco. He gives a couple of very good tips about how he approached studying using the Cisco 360 labs, the INE workbooks, NARBIC stuff, right? So you can read through those. I'm not going to read through them, but you can look through that hackpad and read up on everything that they wrote. Okay, so we have a question to all the CCIEs. When did you decide to go after the digits and why? It's a pretty good question. That's from Michael.
Well, as I responded, I don't have a particularly interesting answer for that, but I was learning the technologies anyway. I was crazy enough to try it, and it just seemed like a good way to test myself. But the end goal was never specifically get the CCIE. It was just basically, learn the technologies and see where you go from there. Honestly, I can actually. It's very fluid in my mind. The day I actually decided I was going to go ahead and straight ahead, really 100% give it a shot. And that's I was in Bangkok actually when Humphrey said, "Yeah, I think you could probably do it." And it's like, well, shit. If he thinks I can do it, there's no reason for me not to try. So that's it essentially.
See, we have a success story from the Bangkok boot camp, and I remember that day. Actually, I think it was James and I. We both, I think we told you and Nam that you both.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we saw you configure, we saw you kind of have like that curiosity, like let me try this, let me try this, right? And so that was that was a year ago, less than a year ago, right? So 11 months.
Yeah, March or whatever. We were eating at that Itai place or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I remember you were like, really?
Sometimes you just gotta believe in yourself.
So I posted a link to actually, yeah, it's to one of my most favorite animes. It's called Samurai Champloo. It's pretty awesome. You should go check it out if you're an anime fan. So that scene at 1735 really captures, I guess, the spirit of why I decided to pursue the number. It took me about 4 years of study, off and on. And I had a lot of inner demons to battle, I had a lot of, there was a constant struggle of, do I really want it or do I not? And finally, towards the end of the journey, like towards the last year, I stopped being like this off and on, half dedicated, half, just like half-assed effort, and I really buckled down and I started to study. Now, why I did it? I mean, go back to 2010. I was still in school, and my brother was out working for a Fortune 100 company. It's KPMG, and you know, he wasn't earning particularly very much, maybe like 60, 70,000 in California, and these guys, this company was basically abusing their grads. They were working in like 11, 12 hours and being told, hey, you don't want this job, you know, we'll go get another job. We'll find someone else. And I told myself, I don't ever want to be in a situation where I'm told I need this job, right? And that's really part of the reason why I got it. Part of it is because I love networking too. It would be very hard for me to study as much as I did if I didn't enjoy the topic. But that scene right there is basically really captures the spirit of why I decided to pursue my number. There's also a philosophical bit to it too. When I was in school, I looked at I was originally an accounting major, right? I didn't know the first thing about computers, and I remember I failed my first accounting course, and I was like, oh, you know, I just want to look at what major I can take without losing all my business credits, and I started computer information systems, and I went from there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, that was a tangent. Yeah, like I said, I didn't want to be in that situation where someone told me or took advantage of me because they thought I needed a job. And this CCIE definitely provided me that outlet.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I always tell people, leave. If you're going to leave a place, leave on your own terms. Never be forced out. Never be forced to quit. You know, laid off or anything like that. If you're going to leave, you know, you do it yourself, right? Never be placed in a situation where someone else makes that decision. So, okay, questions from the audience that we didn't cover. Questions you still want answered. We'll take a couple and then we'll call it a night. Like hopefully we covered almost every question that. Okay, so Randy says, what type of software does Cisco use for its lab tests? Well, they use IOU routers and you're then telnetted in or puttied. It's putty. And then they have a script to grade everything afterwards. One more question. I think we covered everything like the cost, the mindset, the boot camps, the workbooks. I don't think there's going to be any other video or any other video in existence that's going to cover all of this, that what we've done in the last almost 3 hours. Azamat says, what's the average CCIE salary? Kind of depends on where you are. I mean, you should, I will say that if you're going for this just for the money, it's probably not going to work out too well for you. Uh, you need to have something else, another purpose, or another reason why you're going for this. Because the time you're going to spend in this is going to be significant. Okay, we're out of here. I've got this recorded on Camtasia, and after I render it, I'll post it up. You guys will get a link, and you can rewatch it. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the Slack room.